Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 809. Today we're going to talk about Tales of Arthurian Knights. This is a game that has just come out recently from WizKids and developed and written by Andrew Parks, but based on the Tales of Arabian Nights by Eric Goldberg. So if you're not familiar with Tales of Arabian Nights, that was a game that's been out probably about 15 years or more. I'd have to look it up. And what that game is very much a story-driven narrative adventure game where you kind of start off randomly and go through a bunch of random encounters, and there's a giant book and you read different passages, kind of like a glorified choose-your-own-adventure set during the sort of fictional sort of time frame of the 40 Thieves kind of universe, I guess you could say. This is a very similar style game set during the Legend of King Arthur and Camelot and all that kind of thing. This does have some very notable differences if you've played Arabian Nights. This is, I would say, has a similar feel, but there's definitely some mechanical interjections, and not to spoil the end of the review, but there's some parts where I think it succeeds. There's also some different sort of modes that you can play with this one. To be honest, I played Tales of Arabian Nights once, and it was like 15 years ago. I don't think it was that long ago, but and so I'll leave that for the end. But yeah, so this game basically plays, you can play it from 1 to 4 players. You can do cooperative, you can do solo, of course, and you can do competitive. And then there is also kind of like, oh gosh, I forget what it's called, an epic quest. I'll tell you when we get to the table here. But there's sort of like kind of couple of different game modes that you can play, and that's whether you're playing competitive or cooperative. So you can sort of, I don't know, beef up the narrative a little bit. Kind of, it gives you some hooks to kind of hang it on in a way. But we'll talk more details now at the table, and I'll come back and give you my kind of general review of it. Okay, I've got everything kind of set up here. This is the main board. I've got it turned on its side. You can actually see it's England and Scotland and Ireland, and France is down here. These are some of the older names: Normandy, Scotland. Scotland's not an old name. Ireland, Logres, Cambria, Cornwall, and Brittany. And there's also some different spaces that you can see on the board there. You'll be moving around to these different spaces. You can go out into the sea. Every player is going to get a knight, and they're going to have a little standee. It's going to start off in Camelot. And I believe there's like 8 different knights. They are not different at all. They're just kind of different colors and textures and faces and all kinds of things to choose from. But you will get a player board like so. So here I have Sir Palamides. And you can start with 3 skills. So there's different skills here. You can see we've got color coded here: martial, spiritual, courtly, wilderness. And there's different colors there. And you have 3 skills in each of the different types there. So you can see the diplomacy, that's a courtly skill, and so on. And so to start off, the rulebook gives you a suggestion. So you could start off with the 3 suggested skills. They'll go here in this +1 column, or you can just choose whatever 3 you want to have. So you can just kind of play around with that. So you can start off asymmetrically in that regard, but it's very much up to your choice, or if you can choose what the rules kind of suggest for that night. And then as you get skills, these will go up, but you can see you have like diminishing returns there. So you can only get 1 skill up to a +6. You can have 2 at +5, and so on. And when you gain a skill, if you don't have the skill, if it says gain diplomacy, then you'll just gain and put that there. If it says gain diplomacy again, you would just move it up, or it may say like gain a courtly skill. So you could choose one of the skills you have, move it up, or you could choose a courtly skill that you don't have and just add that one to the +1. And this also will fill up here. If you ever gain a skill and this is full, like you haven't moved enough up, then you can gain a destiny point, which is a victory point, anytime that happens. So if you had these filled up here, and let's say I had warfare and it said gain warfare, you couldn't move it. So instead you could gain a destiny point if you wish to do that. So that's what's going on your player board, and there's a turn aid right here on the board, which is the same for every player. And what you're going to be doing is playing through 3 eras or 3 ages over the course of the game. And the idea is to either score the most destiny points, or that's if you're playing competitive, or you'll have a pool of destiny points here off to the side that you will set up based on the number of players in the game. So if you're playing co-op, the idea is to deplete that pool by the end of the game. And if you do, then you've won the game, and then any other points you might score beyond that initial pool, then that'll kind of be your score at the end of the game. But you've won the game if that pool is empty at the end. So in addition to the skills here, you have a couple of other things. You've got these 3 categories of renown, which we'll take a look at. And I apologize for these being sideways, but you have here 3 tokens with your little avatar there. And in 3 categories, you've got divinity, romance, and villainy there. And so over the course of the game, through different quests and actions, these will start to go up. So if you get really high in villainy, it might move down here. And you can see maybe, there's a number here. Let me zoom in just a little bit. I think you can see that. There's a 3 here. So this is your movement. So everybody will start at 0 in each of those 3 categories. And so whatever your furthest marker down is, that will be your movement. So this is 3. But now I've got villainy down here. So since I'm in this kind of next bracket, this next category, I now can move 4 spaces. And that is really what your turn is going to be about. Now there will be interactions with the various skills I showed you on the player board, as well as these different renown levels that will come into play. But your turn is effectively move spaces up to the number of that. You could move 0 if you wish, although there's special rules with how the encounters work if you choose to move 0. But typically you don't want to move 0. And so you can move that number of spaces, and then you'll have an encounter. So here you can move different spaces like that, and you just move to adjacent spaces along these different lines. There's no really blocking or anything like that. You can have multiple people in the same space. The one thing to note about this spaces are there is different types of terrain, and there's a little key at the top of the map. But you can see here, we've got a swamp area here. This green area, as you can imagine, is a forest. These gold areas are plains, and so on. So sometimes, there'll be different rules and story beats that will interact with different types of terrain. The other thing to note here is the number in these. And so those will be a difficulty modifier. So if you're doing a test on a particular quest or encounter, it'll say, 3 plus the location modifier. So if I was doing a test here, it'd be 3 plus 1, so I would need to beat a 4. So that's what that's for. And you can see everything's broken into different regions and so on. And so there'll be different ways to interact with that. And the first thing you're going to do, though, before you start the game is you're going to get a starter quest. This is what's going to start to give you a lot of your destiny points. Again, destiny points are effectively victory points. So it's going to give you some starter things like this. And the way that the game works is, like I said, it's broken into the 3 ages. And I'll get back to this later, but you can see there's a number here, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. So you're going to read this at the start of each age. So you're always going to start the game reading entry 1,000 on this giant book here. So you get this huge book, and you can see there's just tons of text and paragraphs to read. And so you're going to go to 1,000, and then you're going to play through 4 rounds in that first age, the first era. And then once you get to the start the 5th age, you're going to read entry 2,000, 4 more rounds, entry 3,000. And these are little sort of slight narrative shifts in the story. And the game will interact with that. So this first era is kind of like the golden age of Camelot, and King Arthur's just telling all of his knights, just go out and do good deeds, go out, have adventures, go make a memory, be memorable, have people write stories about you. Great. And then we get in the second age, and then that is kind of where the quest for the Holy Grail begins. And so there'll be some revolving around that. And then down here in the third age, it'll be kind of like the fall of Britain, in a way called the final wars of Britain. So there'll be some rallying of the troops and some more combat oriented types of, narrative beats that are going on there. So that's going to kind of decorate the overall sort of adventures that you have in your kind of day-to-day operations, if you will, of being a knight. So when you get these quests, and you're going to get a starting quest, and everybody's going to get one of those. There's a handful of these that will get shuffled up. So as soon as you complete this, and at the end of every age, you're going to get draw a new kind of just random quest off of this deck here. And there'll be other things in the story and the choices that will tell you to draw quests. But you're always going to have at least one quest. If you ever run out of quests, you immediately draw a quest. And what you're going to do is, most of the time, put out these quest markers on the board in various spots. And it's going to tell you where to put them generally. It's not going to tell you exactly where to put them. And it might, in a competitive game, also tell you to have another player pick them. Now, there is a rule here for solo and co-op. So instead of having another player pick them, there was some random generation here about different regions. You can see here, this goes with that region, that region, that region, that region, and then cities and terrain and special events within the region. You can also use this in the competitive play, which I'll talk about as kind of a variant, so that your friends and your opponents aren't picking the absolute worst possible locations for your quest to be. So you can randomize it if you want. You can do that in competitive or co-op. So you're going to have these spots here on the board. And again, the quests are where you go and get destiny, among other things that will happen to you. So you're going to try and move to where your quest markers are and then having an encounter. So there's two kinds of encounters. It's kind of like a general encounter, a standard encounter, and then there's a special encounter. Mostly you're going to be having these standard encounters, and that's flipping cards off of this deck here. Now, you will have taken out a bunch of these location cards because there's certain types of encounters in that deck. So based on the number of players, you're going to take out a certain number of these. So you will have some locations in here, and these will kind of trigger sort of, you know, almost like little side quest chains that you can go to, because it'll tell you to go to the location and then do a thing. And then there'll be other cards in here. In addition to the locations, you have characters, and then you have also like these sort of different things, right? So a bunch of characters. Here's a harrowing battlefield, the magnificent feast. They're not really like events, they're just kind of general things. Mysterious castle, but a strange beast. And so if you draw a character, you're going to draw that character, then you're going to draw a feature off the feature deck, for example. So you've moved to your location over here, and you've had your standard encounter. You'll say you drew a hunter, and then you drew desperate. So you're going to look at this, you're going to say, okay, this is entry 1520. So you're going to go in the book, you're going to dig through here, you're going to find entry 1520, and then you're going to read it, and then, or your opponent is going to read it in a competitive game. Then you're going to make some choices. You're going to do some tests. You're going to roll a die. There's one 6-sided die in the game. You're going to modify that die based on the test. So it may say, hey, you can use honor to do this type of choice, or hunting to do this type of choice. Or you can choose, you know, a martial skill, or you can choose a courtly skill. And then you're going to apply the modifier there. And there'd be some other randomizing factors and mitigations and things like that that could come into play. You're going to succeed or pass on the test, and you're going to probably get some destiny. You might get some rewards. You might be able to increase a skill, learn a skill. You might be able to bump up one of your renowns. You might get a free movement out of the action. There's going to be a variety of effects. You may be able to either go through here and dig up a named treasure, so you go find a specific treasure, or it'll tell you to shuffle this up and find a random treasure. And that's what you're going to do. So now if you don't draw a character like this hunter, you draw one of these sort of entities here, like a perilous cave. This one, you're going to take whatever age you're in. So if you're in age 1, the golden age, you'll put the card there, and you'll find your entry based on the terrain that you're at. But if you had moved on to age 2, then these will be a little bit different. So they will kind of skew the narrative based on kind of the time frame that you're in when it's one of these cards. So you're going to have your encounter, and that's going to be your turn. Now, a couple other things, you might have some of these status cards. Now, each player, there's 4 decks of these, and they're nice and alphabetized. So it may say, I just pulled these out earlier, maybe you become beast form, right? And you become ensorcelled. And so this will sort of dictate some of the choices that you have and limit them. So you have these little sigils here. So when you first get this, so for example, you become ensorcelled like so. And then you're going to put that there. And then at the start of every turn, this is going to start to move down. And once it moves off, then this is going to dissipate. Now some, like these, this one says you're kind of accompanied by like a special character who maybe gives you a little bonus. If it's got the little star there, that's going to stay on there. And it's just going to stay there forever, unless some game effect maybe comes in. But it's not going to naturally, you know, go away and degrade like that. So those statuses are going to come into play. Sometimes they're beneficial, sometimes they're harmful. Sometimes they're a little bit of both. And then at the end of each era, you're going to score in different ways. And that's going to be based on like how far you've leveled up certain skills, how far you've leveled up renown, and so on. So you want to try to focus on that as well. And because that's going to give you more and more destiny as you get to the end of these different eras. You have these little scoring rounds and so on. And then there's some end game scoring based on how far each player has moved down these different renowns. So you have, again, you have divinity, romance, and villainy. So it kind of is like sort of a vibe check at the end of the game of like, was everybody collectively more villainous or romantic or divine? And then whoever scores the highest in that will get some bonus points in that. So that's kind of an interesting sort of little wrinkle there at the end of the game. And that happens either co-op or competitive. And that's, again, a way that you might drain your final points there by some of that end game scoring. Let's see, now the last thing to talk about is at the end of the second round, players will get a call to arms card, and there's a co-op side as well as a competitive side. And you can keep these to the end of the game, or you can use them, and they're basically like a free movement to get where you need, because as you can see, the map gets pretty spread out, and so you might have like a special quest thing that you're like, man, I really just wish I could get there, but it's at the other side of the map. And so you can kind of use this as a little get out of jail free card. You can't use it to get to Camelot, because you will get some bonus destiny at the end of the game if you're in Camelot at the end. Kind of you've come home to help support King Arthur in his final war. So you can't use the call to arms to do that, but you can use it to go get somewhere else. And then I think the last thing, sort of component wise, two things. This is just minor thing, but so there are a bunch of these little tokens here. These are just little numbers. So sometimes, you know, in a game it'll tell you to write down a special keyword and say, hey, write down the kaleidoscope cat, and that means you've encountered that cat. And so later on the game may or may not ask you about it. And this, instead of writing something down, this is just a little reminder that, hey, maybe something will happen later that will interact with that event that was specific to you, which is interesting. And then in addition to these age cards, these 3 age cards, which you'll always play with, you have these grand quests. I think I called these the epic quest earlier. And you have 3 for each age. So you can see we've got the war, the final war, we have the quest for the Grail, and then you have the one for the Golden Age of Camelot. So you'll shuffle these up, and then in the first round you'll reveal one of the yellow ones, and this will give you some special bonuses that everybody can compete with, and you'll have special quest markers that are for everybody that match the color there. Now you don't play this when you're doing a pure solo mode. This is for 2 or more players, and you can do this whether it's competitive or cooperative, and they will add like a little bit of extra sort of difficulty or more options when a 3 and 4 player game is happening. But these will be tied in again with sort of the general theme of the era and the age. And these are ways for players to score a lot more bonus destiny during the course of the game. So it can make the co-op game maybe a little easier if these are convenient and doable. And it can make the competitive game just, you know, give you some more variance there. Now there is also, I should say, just, you know, saying, oh, I would just play with these and it'd be easier. Well, you can increase the difficulty of the co-op game by increasing the pool size. And there, it gives you like a beginner, intermediate, and an advanced like amount of destiny points that you could try to get. And I think that's pretty much it there. I mean, the main thing of the game here is, probably what I'll start the review off with, is just the amount of text and reading and nightly adventures and narrative and adjectives and decoration and sometimes poetry that is involved with Tales of Arthurian Knights. Okay, so that was a brief overview of Tales of Arthurian Knights. Let's go into my 3 pillars of review. We'll talk about play time. What does the play time say? 45 minutes per player. That is about right. I've played this at 1, 2, and 3 players. And yeah, it seems to take about that long. And you know, it kind of depends. I think the first time you play it, there'll be a little bit of the higher end on that player time. But once you kind of get the hang of like where things go, and you know, people kind of get used to reading passages out of the book, then it'll pick up a little bit there. So it doesn't go too long, but you know, it'll take a little bit of time. So imagine with 4 players, you could take about 3 hours. Now, not played it with 4, but I could see that. But frankly, for a game of this style, 4 or 3 hours for 4 players, that seems about right. That seems like not too long, not too short. And now in terms of the player count, like I said, I played at 1, 2, and 3. What do I like? I like all of it, frankly. I've played a co-op and competitive, and also like pure solo, which is co-op, but sort of. And I will say this. I think 4 players, when we did play our 3-player game, I don't know that I agreed fully, but I didn't disagree. The other 2 players that I played with, they said they wouldn't want to play it ever with 4, that max would be 3. And the reason for that is the amount of reading. Now, it's been forever since I played Tales of the Arabian Nights, but I don't remember this much reading, because there are some passages in this that are quite lengthy. I don't think too long, honestly. We'll get to that in a minute, but they're lengthy. I think the narration and the prose and whatever's in there is a good length for most of the things that it's part of. I feel like it doesn't waste time. I'm not sitting there like going, oh, this guy's full of himself with the writing or whatever. I don't feel any of that at all. But there is some periods that are like, there were parts where somebody would open the book and they'd be like, oh man, because they would see like the paragraphs that were involved. I don't necessarily agree. I think this is the thing, it's kind of a cop-out thing where it's like, well, what if we had 4 players that were all into it? Well, then there wouldn't be a problem, would there? So, I mean, that's a dumb thing to say, but in terms of a review thing, but, knowing going in that, it's going to take some time to read. There's a lot of reading. Now, I like that, though. I liked being there to reading and seeing what was happening with the other knights and the other players. I'll get to that more in a minute. And it was kind of fun, kind of the teasing and stuff like that, and the funny things that happen and all that sort of stuff. But I also did kind of like that cozy little feel of like just soloing it and just kind of reading to myself. I didn't have to read out loud to anybody. I didn't have to like use my jaw muscles a whole bunch, just kind of sat there, took my time, just kind of read it, kind of reveled in sort of the imagination of whatever was going on. That was really cool. That was nice. So I don't know. If you pick this up to solo it only, I would say you could, because you can also play it. You can play it solo, but then if you played it like co-op solo, where you controlled multiple knights, I don't know if I'd want to control more than 2. But if you do that, then you can play with the co-op stuff, the Grand Quest stuff, and play with that. And that's really cool. I really like that, and so I'll get to that here now. But yeah, I would get it all the player counts, but maybe 4 is a little much, but I don't know. If everybody's into it and you're not in a big hurry, and you're okay with this kind of narrative thing, then you should be good. So that leads me kind of to my main sort of review point, is like, what is this game like? How do I compare it? And here's the thing. For me, I'm like not usually a fan of games where you read a lot. Like, I just am not. If I'm playing like an RPG or some kind of legacy big campaign box game and there's like a boatload of reading, I'm just like, I'm checked out. And here's why. Because this game is so dead simple mechanically. There's not a lot, there's no thinking involved. The thinking of this is your choice in the book and how it kind of relates to your character and your story. When I'm playing like a big old game, like say Oathsworn, which is a game I love, but if I had to read all of that, I don't think I would like it. Now, Oathsworn had an app that kind of narrated everything for you, so that was cool. And nobody had to read nothing. We had a professional voice actor who was great, doing all that for us, so it got us into the game. Beautiful, perfect. I don't have to really think. I just have to wait for a choice to come up, and then when I get to the combat, and that's where the real crunchy statistical card play stuff comes in, then I'm using my brain cells for that. If I've got to use it to like read out loud and try to attempt accents and inflection and project emotion and all this stuff, and then I got to shift gears and like think like mathematically, no, I don't want to do that. But this is cool because that's what the game really is about, is the reading and the delivery and the funny stuff that happens, and you can get into that. You don't have to think about the game too much. Now, there's not like there's no choice, and it's also not like there's just easy, meaningless choice either. Like, there is pregnant choice with some impact. It's not friggin' 18xx or something, right? But there's a meaning behind it. There's an impact. The game has it bounces something back at you. It's not a bunch of math, but it bounces something at you, and that's the important part. So I didn't mind the amount of reading in this, which I thought was kind of a shocker to me. But once I thought about it, like I just explained. So the other part of this is, and again, my vague memory of Tales of the Arabian Nights was it was like random chaos can happen, which is cool, okay? And there's another game that I played a lot more than that, which is similar, which is Eldritch Horror, which doesn't have like a bunch of text or anything, but it's kind of like you run around the map, you have an adventure, there's a few more mechanics to it. You read very small flavor text bits, and there's a little bit more game mechanisms in there. And I remember the first time I played Eldritch Horror, and I was like, about this game. But then it was like something happened, and I remember exactly what it was, but this is not an Eldritch Horror video, so I'm not going to talk about it. But there's a thing that happened, I was like, oh, okay, this is the world I'm in. And this is what happened with this game, which I didn't have necessarily with Tales of the Arabian Nights, although I kind of want to replay it. And I know they were working on possibly doing a new edition, but there's trouble with printing it or something. But anyway, let's focus on this. The thing that was cool about this was, and this is like, I cannot express this enough, how much I feel this. But this is a King Arthur game. And the stuff that happens is all scaffolded and strung up by the smart little mechanisms they do that keep things random and procedural and kind of just, auto-generated stuff that happens, but somehow still is grounded. And I understand math-wise how they did it with the cards that match up, and then like how the arc of the game changes with the three eras, and how certain parts of the story will come in. So the game at certain moments is very personal to your knight's journey, like their personal, almost like moral journey in a way, but also kind of the things that are happening in the overall general story and in the land as a whole. And so the way you interact with that feels very natural, organic, and realistic in a way, because if you think about today, when you go about your day, you have the stuff that you do, you go to work, or you have kids, or you have parents, or you have different people you interact with, you go to the grocery store, that kind of stuff. And then there's all the crap that goes around you in the world at large. And it's like, how much do you interact with the larger scope of things and the big picture items, I guess you'd call it. And then, the day-to-day stuff. And there's a real sense of that in this game in terms of like these really meaningful things that are meaningful to your character and how they tie back into, King Arthur's overall goals. That's really cool and really, really neat. And as I said before, the narrative and the prose and everything stays grounded enough. And there's a cool bibliography in the back of the rule book where I think it's Andrew Parks sources all of his stuff. Because I'm going to tangent just for a second. So there's a movie called The Green Knight, which I now want to go back and rewatch because I did not like that movie. The first time I saw it, I was like, this is a mess. And there was some neat stuff, but I was like, this is why did I watch this? I want to go watch it again, because not only does it have parts of that story in here and parts of a whole bunch of other wealth of, Arthurian tales woven in here that you can kind of bounce off of, but like the way that movie worked with that knight's journey, I was like, even though some of the knights in here didn't have a similar journey at all through the multiple plays that I've had, it still felt like the vibe to me of like, this is a knight's tale, a knight's quest of their own little sort of forgotten journey in the world of King Arthur. And it was so cool how that worked. And we had multiple instances of, again, through various different games. I think I'm going to kind of conflate all of them, but, I know one time I was playing a character, I don't even remember the name of the knight now, so this was a couple of weeks ago, but he wanted, and I apologize for this if it's offensive, he wanted to get laid all the time. And I don't mean to say that in a very like high school crass way. It was just very funny. Like, this guy could not stop, and he got an ability that made him, I think it was like lustful or something. And so his initial part of the journey in the first half of the game was just like ridiculous. I'm like, this guy's an 18-year-old, 100%. He has lost control of himself. And so I leaned into that, and it was really cool. And then it was cool how his character kind of evolved. Whereas another player in that particular game, they kind of seem to naturally just want to collect treasure and items, and that's kind of what they were about. And the other day when I was playing it solo, I played it through, and the initial quest was like a hunt. And so the character that I was playing, the Palamides who was laid out there, he in effect became so kind of obsessed with the hunt that he became this kind of weird amalgamation of hunter and hunted. He got the beast form thing, which I laid out there. And then that kind of like forces his decision. So it's like somehow themes sort of arise out of your playthrough. And it's also interesting because it's like not going to just stick with that and become like a one-beat thing. It's like going to sort of inform like a character evolution in a way, which is just like, what is happening? How is this possible in this game? And that is just a really, really neat thing. The other one was a different game. I think this was the co-op game I played where I can really only strongly remember my own stuff, but I remember when I was at the table, other players were having like similar experiences, and it was nice to see that experience, but I wasn't like quite as, in touch with it, as married to it as my own, because I was, always kind of working on my own stuff. And my guy was basically like always trying to get into a fight in that game, but he never would win a fight. At least for a long time, like almost to the end of the second age, like just could never win. And which is great, because it was like the bad dice rolls, was like, oh, but it's like, no, this is awesome. Because he is such a failure, pathetic. And I was like, I love this. And then and the way he kind of shifted, and then he was just really winning all the fights, because he would always like kind of gain a skill as a consolation prize. So all of his warfare skills were going up. So it was like he couldn't do it, and then he could do it. And it was great. It was perfect how that worked out. So again, I think this is really, really neat, and just the level of care that they've taken, not just with like the mechanics and how everything kind of just combos up with the different cards, but with what is actually written in the book is really, really neat. And there's some parts of it where I'm just reading it and I'm just like, I know they got this from somewhere, and this is a great little knight's passage from some manuscript from however long ago or whatever, some little book of short stories written in the 1960s that was like a summary of King Arthur and whatever. So the scholarlyship or the literature aspect of it's almost like a historical kind of weird artifact in a way that goes along with it, which makes me want to go back and play Tales of the Arabian Nights, because like the Arthur stuff, like was like raised on that. I'm in the West, I'm in the US, and we had Disney cartoons and movies and all these great things coming out of Hollywood, and even some of the British made movies and things like that about knights and King Arthur and all that stuff, and the little Sword in the Stone cartoon and different things. And so it's a little bit more grounded in my thing, so it's able to kind of reach back and touch whatever that sort of seasoning I got as a young person with this stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, this would be cool, like applied to different thematic universes. Like I'm like, oh yeah, the 40 Thieves, and we were joking around like, oh, you could do Game of Thrones, and it would be like, whoa, that would be that'd be kind of cool actually, because it would be like different, and I don't want to, this is the thing, I don't want to water it down and muddy it and make it stupid in pop culture, but I'm like, that would be kind of neat. Like you could apply it to these different things with the way this works, and a lot of these thematic sort of threads that get kind of drawn through the different characters. You could use something that has a wealth of source material about it, and then stack up the system on there. Anyway, but I can't think of a better one than King Arthur. And that kind of stuff. I'm sure there's other great ones out there too. But I really, if you can deal with the reading part of it, and like I said, I was something I wasn't sure about, but I could deal with it just fine after playing it. And it gives you a lot of different avenues to get in. So you can be a little bit more, I'm sorry to ramble here, but I'll close with this. You can be a little bit more like come what may, right? Take out the grand quests. Don't use those. Just kind of go on your knight's journey. And that's when you play solo, you don't play with the grand quest. You just play with the knight. And it's kind of nice. Like it's kind of like the Green Knight. Like he has a thing that happens early on. He may not not to spoil the Green Knight, but he may not behead a giant druid demon and then have a crazy adventure after that. It could be something very simple that starts off and then has like your own kind of little personal, quiet, relaxing sort of journey. You can play it that way. You can get involved in this big, epic adventure. And even when you're playing, competitive, it still feels cooperative in a way. And I would actually play. There's the optional rule to play with the solo co-op randomization. So when another player puts out quest markers for you, you can just do that. Because we found a tendency to be like, at the beginning of our competitive game, it was like, oh, let's just put it in the worst possible place. And I was like, that sucks. I don't want to do that. And so I actually just started putting them, I'm like, you know what? This is thematically fine. And it's also somewhat convenient. So there you go. And then we all played like that. And I'm like, this is great. So I'm like, well, you can make it too easy. And I was like, just use the randomization and it's fine. It can be crappy and not crappy. It can be somewhat convenient. And you can try to path find to get to it. And the randomness seemed fine to me with that part of it. But that you can season to taste with that. Okay, that is Tales of Arthurian Knights. Definitely take a look at it. Thanks.